So welcome to concurrent session A3. This particular session is collaborative approaches to reducing gun and gang violence. So my name is Cindy Pestrak. I will be a facilitator in the background today, supporting the presenters. I have my colleague, Karen Ver, who will be presenting or who will also be monitoring the chat and the question and answer section and all of those things to support this session today. So I just have some quick housekeeping that I'll go through fairly quickly, and then we'll get it right over to introducing our presenters this morning. So I just want to bring your attention to the bottom of your screen where you're going to find the toolbar. You can use the Q&A feature. Please, that's the most efficient way of asking questions in the Q&A feature to submit questions throughout the presentations. We'll be reviewing the questions. We may answer them just in the chat if it's something simple, or we'll save them to the end, and the presenters will leave a few minutes at the end in order to answer as many as those as we can. Please ensure your microphone is on mute until that Q&A session, and then we'll be able to have those questions, have that conversation. This session is being recorded. It will be uploaded to the conference website for future viewing for those who are registered for this conference. And if you're here, you're likely registered for this conference. You'll be able to access the platform for 90 days following the conference. Just reminding everyone, we do have closed captioning for all of our sessions, so please click on the CC icon below if you would like to access closed captioning throughout the presentation. There is an evaluation at the end of the session. It should be in the agenda on the virtual platform. There'll be a survey button there at the bottom, that right next to the join button, and your feedback is really appreciated. It's short and sweet. We will leave a couple minutes at the end of the session for you to complete that evaluation to help inform future events such as this conference. We also want to make sure that all of you who are attending today engage with each other in thoughtful and considerate way. We want to acknowledge that the impact of our words and our interactions with others, and not tolerate any sort of inappropriate or unnecessary language or speech that may be offensive. So please know that if something is said or something you do need to take care of yourself, please be mindful of that. Take a break, step outside, practice some deep breathing, reach out to someone you trust. If something that we talk about in today's session impacts you in such a way that you do require immediate support or feeling like you may be in crisis, please go to the FAQ icon on the conference page, homepage, to access contact information from Connects Ontario. And if you do feel that there was an incident that you do want to report, you can contact the event manager, Sherry Sim, by either clicking the assistance button on the top right menu bar on your screen or sending an email or text to Sherry. So thank you for all of that. I would now like to introduce our presenters of this particular session, again, from the session called Collaborative Approaches to Reducing Gun and Gang Violence. These folks are from the Hamilton Hub. It's Jennifer Bonner and Liz Pfister. Over to you.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much. So you'll have both of us co-presenting today. Our presentation today is really going to focus on a most critical yet often excluded group, those who are at the very center of violence. Often they're acting simultaneously as both victims and perpetrators of harm. My name is Jennifer Bonner, and I'm the Executive Director and Founder at the Hub. And I'm joined by my colleague, Liz Pfister, who is one of our directors and the lead for this program. Over the course of this presentation, we'll present our model for addressing this underserved group, demonstrating how we use social network and public health methodologies to reduce, interrupt violence transmission where it starts. Before detailing our program, I just wanted to give a little bit about our history. The Hub was founded during the pandemic in March of 2020 to identify, immediately address the service collapse for people experiencing street homelessness. Our rapid transmission into a not-profit centered on low barrier, trauma-informed care and it taught us how to effectively reach really high-risk populations. During this time, we identified a critical hidden service gap: vulnerable individuals, particularly young men, who lacked support and had no trust in workers due to their involvement in institutional systems. Our strategy was pretty simple. We had to be present. Present meant often late into the night. We understood that success depended entirely on trust, and it took a lot of time. For some of these young men to test and vet our intentions, it was up to a year. But our sustained presence paid off. The hard-won trust provided us the essential street-level insight needed to build a program that truly addressed their needs. It's important to note that everything that we will be presenting was designed and implemented with their voices at the forefront of everything that we do. Recognizing that traditional charitable models, diversion, after-school programs, had little impact on these individuals because they were still out here. We launched our 24-hour violence intervention and case management model, and this model emphasized long-term behavior change and community integration. Currently, the Hub in Hamilton has a medical clinic, a court support program, all in a standalone building that also serves as the host for this outreach program. It has become a home base for over 40 case managed clients and also serves as a community resource to the folks we started serving back in 2020.
So we're going to start talking really generally about what we know about violence. We have to understand the problem itself well in order to lead us to create and build data-driven and problem-focused solutions. So there's a couple things we know about violence. We know that violence is clustered, geographically speaking, and we know it's concentrated, perpetrated by about 20% of individuals. And this 20% is responsible for 80% of community gun crime. So knowing this, getting to the root cause of the problem means allocating resources to this 20%. And we can't limit our understanding of gun crime to only one driver. Often communities and systems get hung up on the only driver for gun crime being poverty, immorality of a person, or looking at it as a calculated act driven from a place of desiring profit. Gun crime actually often is a reaction, an uncalculated act, quickly chosen as a pathway with little critical thought based off a conflict. Behavioral economics gives us a robust understanding of this. Murder rates actually increase when social interactions are prevalent. This has taught us that gun violence is related to something correlated with employment, with lack of employment and poverty, but only focusing on employment issues and poverty alone won't be enough to change whatever the root cause of the gun crime are, which are interpersonal dynamics. Behavioral economics teaches us that there is a formulaic understanding of gun violence. Knowing we as social services can't change gun control or the gun part of this equation, what we can influence is the violence part of this equation, using data-driven, evidence-based techniques that work to increase the mental bandwidth of that 20%, increasing conflict resolution skills through peaceful pathways, working with System 1 cognition, which we'll talk about later, and building up more forgiving places. Forgiving places are those with both informal and formal social control. This can look like street lighting to deter conflict happening in an unlit alleyway that can pose as incentive, or those caring adults that have eyes on the street, that in forgiving places would step in based on a trusting connection with those in conflict. Unforgiving places, on the other hand, lack informal social control, often only having formal social control being law enforcement, which can serve as a deterrent. But when there's not trust with mechanisms of both informal and formal social control, we lose the opportunity to get ahead of gun violence before it happens. Gun violence can't be limited to one cause. More often than not, gun crime is driven from situational drivers, conflict, not someone having a calculated desire to harm others.
It's important to clarify that not all gun violence is the same. This is a crucial understanding, and it's sometimes nuanced work. While our program primarily focuses on network-related violence, gangs or groups, the overall burden also includes crimes of passion, domestic violence, suicide by gun, and crimes of profit. Recognizing that there is a spectrum is key to designing comprehensive prevention and intervention policies. We wanted to show this slide to give you an understanding of who we actually serve and why our models needed to be different. When people think of high needs, they usually imagine individuals struggling with homelessness, severe mental health issues, or chronic addictions. These are the clients traditional services are designed for. However, our work is focusing on a completely different, yet equally high-risk group, the 20%. The individuals driving the transmission of violence who are not accessing services. In some cases, they're pretty successful economically, and most likely, potentially even making more money than some of us in this room. Which means that they don't fit our typical charitable models. Critically, if they have tried to access services, they're often rejected. Why? Because they carry specific charges: gun charges, assault charges, possession for purpose charges, human trafficking charges. A history that makes them unsafe to be around in traditional gang prevention programs. So what happens? They become trapped. The criminal justice system views them as purely enforcement problems, like that 25-year-old with multiple gun charges who cycles in and out of the system. But what we do know is that jails don't heal people. The community is unwilling to serve them, and the justice system only strives to contain them. So our program is designed to be a low-barrier, trauma-informed bridge for those most at the center of violence. This visual uses the standard public health pyramid to clearly illustrate the spectrum of violence prevention and, critically, where the hub focuses its efforts. Primary prevention focuses on all youth, families, and community members through broad universal efforts like early intervention program and generalized youth mentorship. Secondary prevention targets at-risk youth, those showing early risk factors, lack of protective factors, and they're often targeted through school programs or social services in geographical regions. All of this work is essential, but it addresses lower risk populations. However, the top two tiers address the most challenging population, and this is where the system usually breaks down. The top of the pyramid is that intervention and suppression stage. This tier deals with individuals who are at the center of violence, those driving the transmission. The individuals who are victims and perpetrators simultaneously. Suppression is the role of law enforcement, but as we discussed, jails don't heal people. For some of our clients, we do recognize, though, that this is part of their journey. Intervention is the gap, the 20% of the network who are most critical to disrupt, but who are simultaneously the most service excluded due to their involvement in violence. Canada has maintained funding efforts in the primary and secondary prevention spaces, leaving those beyond traditional service delivery models, quite frankly, without service. This has meant that law enforcement has been left to tackle both the intervention and suppression. We have examples of this with the rise in rapid response teams and crisis teams being deployed under policing initiatives when thinking about homelessness and addictions, in which their teams support navigation in both. Unfortunately, for this group of individuals, police have a tighter mandate. And while some teams in policing services help to mentor or connect with these groups, they're always going to be viewed as an enemy, so this could get very complicated. What we found through data and collection and connection with those working in the intervention space, predominantly in the US, is that there needs to be both social service engagement and law enforcement connection to this demographic. When designing programs, it's important to recognize that the country's data is skewed. These kids, the ones on the slide, they're not attending your town halls or filling out those surveys in the park. We hear often from them how no one has ever asked them what they needed. So this is where the hub came in. Our 24-hour violence intervention model is positioned to address this critical intervention layer with the use of credible messengers. We act as a low-barrier bridge between the suppression justice system and the community. We do not duplicate efforts of primary or secondary prevention. We specialize primarily in the most difficult cases, the 20%, or the cases that social services are unwilling or unable to take on. We address these folks, like the ones in the article, who would not walk into most of our agencies without a court order to do so. In short, while the foundational efforts prevent youth from sliding into risk, our job is to guide that 20% at the absolute center of the storm to find solutions for themselves. Prevention models don't suit the needs of that 20%. Root cause solutions require going to the helm of the harm and supporting them to reframe ideas about what justice is. It is effective at reducing gun and gang violence. They're not being served elsewhere. And last, but certainly not least, the economics prove that it's cheaper. Lots of research supports that more police and more jails has little effect on crime rates. But we also know that widespread prevention efforts are expensive and don't have the effectiveness that targeted intervention has. We can look no further than the Dare Not to Do Drugs program launched in the 80s. These programs do little to address strengthening refusal skills or addressing social influence. These type of programs usually rely on scare tactics rather than true behavior change. How many times have we heard, if we just find something for the kids to do, they'll be fine? We need more after-school programs. Or maybe we need a school intervention team. While prevention is a really important part of the process for many, it's also clear from the most recent research that it is cheaper and more effective to use specifically targeted efforts to those causing the most community harm instead of widespread prevention that works from a one-size-fits-all mentality. So, as Canadians, we need to do both. However, most of the work that currently exists in Canada is only in the prevention space, limiting the ability to interrupt cycles of violence and harm itself, often leaving these intervention levels to the justice system. But as we said earlier, these young men just end up in the parks and street corners hidden from services, and they do end up back in our communities, cycling through the harms that put them in this space initially. While we talk about the human cost of violence, we must also recognize the massive financial burden. This staggering figure isn't just one line item. It covers multiple sectors, showing just how deeply gun violence permeates our society and our economy. Equally important are the less obvious but devastating social costs. The key point here is when we invest in effective intervention like network-informed models, we have the opportunity not just to mitigate harm, but to also save lives and money.
Working with those at the center of gun and gang violence for us has been informed by evidence-based practices, both from academic institutions like Simon Fraser University, University of Maryland, University of Pennsylvania, and McMaster, as well as looking at successful street outreach programs that have seen positive results in gun crime and homicide reduction. Agencies like ROCA in Baltimore, the Cure Violence Global Model, and Center for Justice Innovation in New York, which are joined with us today. When we look at violence as a contagious disease instead of a human characteristic, we can detect the violence, prevent the spread of violence, and change norms about violence and conflict. These three pillars, detect, prevent spread, and change norms, matter when executing gun and group violence programming. Using a public health model, we have to work off three methods that Thomas Abt from the University of Maryland has taught us a lot about: focus, balance, and fairness. Focus on those at the center of violence, 20%. Balance efforts of interventions and outreach and suppression initiatives in conjunction with therapeutic support. And provide procedurally fair service, a fair model, as those at the center of violence often lack hope that a system could give them a procedurally just experience. So when we actually implement these methods, focus, balance, fairness, understanding that the public health pillars of detection, prevention, and prevention of spread and changing norms, we get the community violence intervention model, which in our work leans on these four key components: risk assessment, credible messengers, place-based outreach, and data and network analysis.
For our violence intervention model to work, we must accurately understand the progression of risk. This slide presents a framework that's often used in threat assessment that shows how vague, distressing thoughts escalate through distinct psychological and behavioral stages into targeted violence. We can essentially categorize the entire progression into four main phases, moving from internal thoughts to imminent action. As an executive director, I'm often asked, how do you keep your team safe? As an agency, we understand the risk, but we also know that for each of these boxes on the screen, there is a targeted intervention. Those interventions are client-centered and require us to have trust and insight not only into the individual, but to the group dynamics associated with the behaviors.
Credible messengers hold weight in their communities. They have high social capital, and those within street networks already respect them. This could be someone who is formerly involved in gun and group violence. It could be someone that held weight and now can be a positive influence as opposed to a negative one. It could be a community member who holds a maternal role for many people, the house that everyone goes to when things go sideways. And it can even be someone who's not removed from the life at all, but can influence the narrative street level to reduce violence. Knowing that crime concentrates and clusters in very specific areas, knowing where the violence is most concentrated matters when choosing where outreach efforts should be allocated. Focused efforts matter here, focusing on crime hotspots, connecting with those people in those crime hotspots, and allocating your outreach resources accordingly. Places of high violence are often low in social control, and they have unpredictability, making it difficult for System 1 cognition to work successfully for folks. This depleted mental bandwidth, which is why places often matter more than we think when working to implement models to reduce violence. Social network analysis is an approach that allows us to identify key violent influencers, those clusters of high-risk individuals and any specific pathways that the violence is being transmitted. This allows us to focus our efforts fairly on the 20% of highest risk of being either victim or perpetrators of violence. Knowing this, we can narrow down who are the key actors in influencing violence, which in turn means they have positive opportunity to be key actors capable of influencing peaceful outcomes. Once identified, the intervention strategy is not necessarily punitive at all, but often focuses on changing their role or reducing their capacity to spread violence in keeping with the public health methodology.
Social network analysis isn't new. It's been used more broadly by the justice system and investigators to track networks by looking at common people being together, being arrested together, common places that crime and folks are frequenting together, and to develop targeted suppression strategies. But what happens, for example, when there is a large bust and some of the network gets broken up? By using credible messengers and place-based outreach, we are able to quickly note the shift in dynamics and reporting structure. Changes in the street dynamics often don't make it on justice radar until the next arrest happens. But being connected to those networks with boots on the ground outreach, we often present in the moment of crisis for that network. This allows us to ramp up our efforts where needed and to possibly influence the shift with the introduction of pro-social connections.
So we built a former partnership with Simon Fraser University. They have a robust criminology department, which made the use of SNA for our team possible. Our ability to access these networks comes from relentless place-based outreach with credible messengers. This is an example of our work. One of our networks, specifically looking at the betweenness and centrality, is a measure of brokerage. Brokerage means how much does a client or group connect between clients and groups that otherwise aren't connected to one another. The algorithm counts how many times this happens in total. The larger node, the larger the score. It's calculated from the perspective of every node trying to travel through the network, always taking the most efficient route. The more a node is used in that travel as a bridge from one unconnected node to another, the higher the betweenness centrality score. This is shown by size and shapes. For example, the larger blue square is the more weight the group holds. The larger the circle, the more networked the individual is. This informs where our efforts need to be. Who holds the weight, what group is most embedded in the community, and who has the ability to change the group norms from violence to peace. So in this diagram or network, we see that groups 1 and 4 are broker groups, showing their potential to connect other clients and groups elsewhere in the network.
This core network strategy, targeting high-risk individuals and groups, is validated by the results. Real-time interruption works. The process of deploying violence interrupters or credible messengers, who are those central nodes you saw on the slide, to mediate conflicts before they escalate into violence is cited as a key component influencing effectiveness. Focus is key. The successful outcomes are linked to focusing on individuals and groups at the highest risk. which is precisely what social network analysis allows programs to do with precision. Focused deterrence. Similar programs that use SNA for law enforcement confirmed that targeting high-risk individuals identified via their network position is more effective than broad police sweeps. In summary, the research supports the theoretical premise that violence spreads like a contagion through networks, and that spread can be effectively halted and reversed by strategically intervening at the most influential points, those central nodes, while simultaneously building a network of resilience with pro-social connection. These 5 goals are the pillars of our violence intervention and case management model. They represent a fundamental shift from simply managing violence to proactively transforming the lives of high-risk individuals and the norms of their network.
Removing one individual from a group dynamic doesn't solve the problem. Working with each member of a street network individually and in a group space shifts norms, changes narratives, and allows for support to be customized based on a couple things. 1, we get to know these individuals in a holistic way, not just focusing on their identity within a group, but their identity when removed from the group. Who are we when we're not in the mindset of street network activities? And how can we build a container where honesty and needs are presented, not just with our team, but with each other? Assessing the individual's entrenchment in group violence is important. And the reason behind their firearm carrying matters too, to ensure that we're working with the 20%. Assessing the group based on how embedded they are as a collective in a respective community is also important.
This slide represents the nuance to this work. Understanding the role of our clients in their journey and where they fit in the proverbial food chain is critical to determining what services can and should do to support them. If you remember that public health pyramid we showed earlier, each of these levels has a direct connection to where an intervention can be made to prevent further entrenchment. It's important to note that without interventions, these young folks can quickly shift given the local context. As an example, it could be arrest within this food chain that draws someone deeper in.
The 4 levels of entrenchment are linked to how someone is within a specific social network. Belonging being the first stage can be exploration of street activities, not necessarily just for belonging alone, but could be potentially based on peer groups they're already attached to, or feeling drawn in by the glorification of the lifestyle, which we know we're seeing a lot of in the younger demographics. These are prevention individuals. The crime stage is those that are street level. They're likely running product, helping with collecting of money, and they're working for someone else. Enterprise are those that are involved in the planning stages, leaders of a crew or a set, but they're not fully left to their own devices, and they still likely have leadership channels above them. But within a respective region or area, they hold some significant weight and leadership. And finally, governance is the upper level leadership. This could be mob-related ties or those that are severely removed from the day-to-day operations of the group. Looking at this from a group lens now, how much weight does the group hold in a specific region? How associated and networked are they with larger street identities? And what are their activities? Is it firearm or drug trafficking or human trafficking, fraudulent behavior? And finally, how much power does the group hold over a specific area?
This slide discusses a critical but often avoidable reality for service providers: the presence of weapons in our community, and specifically among the clients driving the cycle of violence. Understanding why a client is carrying is paramount to accurate risk assessment and successful intervention. This is a conversation many service providers avoid due to understandable fear, liability, but it is essential for safety. The key takeaway is that we work with clients in all 4 of these categories. Our goal is to accurately assess the risk, not just to community and the agency, but to the clients themselves. Understanding the why allows us to intervene appropriately. And while we are an intervention service, we always maintain the critical connection to law enforcement when a threat is determined to be imminent or plausible.
So how can we tell that any of this is working? Assessing the distance the individual has from the group and its activities, and also assessing the group's disembedding process.
So what happens when a client has found intervention services successful? How can we see progress from a behavior change lens? Well, it starts with distance from the group itself. We don't use the word gang exit for a specific reason. Exit creates expectations that those involved are going to completely cut off their network, an expectation that isn't realistic. For some, we're talking about leaving family members behind, and some disconnecting from their whole life and everything that they have been taught about the world. While distance is needed, expecting those at the center of gun and gang violence to fully pull away is unrealistic. And it's a race of their history, and it isn't trauma informed. Folks go through another 4 phases of distance as they prepare to disembed and begin the healing process. Doubting is the first stage. Questioning the group's motive and asking questions about whether or not the risk is worth the proposed reward. Sometimes large sum of money and freedom from poverty. But weighing alternatives comes next usually. Considering other means of income. Maybe that's getting on Ontario Works, or looking at an employment program that is paid, or simply working on taking some time away from the lifestyle and spending it with those pro-social connections noted in the network analysis. Keep in mind, doubting and weighing alternatives can happen in tandem. The turning points equate to taking more intentional step away from criminal activity, elements of the lifestyle. Sometimes it's external forces, such as being arrested, being shot at, or shooting someone. Family breakdown, all of those things can upset the network. Validation is when the individual is committing to those new pathways. There has been distance maintained, the individual has committed to the change, and they've been weighing not necessarily complete removal from the lifestyle. But these behavior changes take time. They don't happen in your typical 2-year funding cycle. They happen differently for every client, and we must have the commitment to honor their journey through the ups and downs.
Then we have to consider if we've reduced risk for the entire group. Is the group taking less risk overall from a safety lens? Have their associations with wider street networks maybe loosened? And maybe is more time being spent with credible messengers and pro-social relationships? The behavior here speaks to the reduction in some group activities. Maybe a group of them are taking a break from moving product. And then power. Does the community have less power being held over them overall from this respective group? Disembedding can also be a police operative. Larger operations where a group gets disrupted. And relationships matter here to know who's coming up next to fill in the gaps of the group that were taken down. Thinking about this from a trauma-informed approach, which I know we've all heard a lot about throughout all of our journeys in this work, we've broken it down to these core components. Safety can only exist when there's trust and transparency. Those we work alongside get to teach us what safety and trust means to them. And this is where peer support and mutual embracing of the wisdom of those with lived and living experience comes into play. Programs can be designed with the best of intentions, but are they really meeting the needs of those they're intended for? In order to build safe spaces where this knowledge and translation can exist, there needs to be empowerment for those at the center of violence to share their voice and their needs with choice. We need to remove the power imbalance, shifting from a lens of servitude to a lens of working together and working alongside, working based on presenting options and choices that feel attainable. Those at their center of violence are the strongest actors to do this work. Knowing that we're 2 white social workers before you today is something we're aware of being harmful. White practitioners represent intergenerational harm, colonization, trauma, and systemic oppression. And this knowledge is at the forefront of our work every day, knowing deeply that we're not here to westernize experiences, but rather learn and position ourselves in places where we can be advocates for system change. We need to shift our mindsets from shifting our mindsets to not only looking at mugshots, but looking at those we work with as those with having dynamic stories, focusing on their positive assets and their humility. We get more buy-in to engage in more intentional therapeutic work when we shift our mindset of those at the center of violence. Which leads us into therapeutic opportunities. Like I mentioned earlier, System 1 cognition is important here. System 1 cognition is a series of automatic responses that we've developed for routine low-stakes situations that we see over and over again in our daily lives. That type of thinking is low effort, and it happens so quickly, we're not even aware that we're doing it. It's really useful for navigating routine parts of life, but it gets us into trouble when we're navigating challenging, unpredictable interpersonal relationships. This is highlighted in unforgiving places, which environments that lack social signals and consequences for mistaking social signals can be severe. System 2 cognition, on the other hand, is deliberate and slow and gives us a chance to think rationally. It solves problems, it does cost benefit and pros and cons calculations, and it's very mentally taxing. It takes so much mental effort that our minds are designed to do as little of this as possible. And this is where deeper work can happen, rebuilding tools and skills to allow for System 1 to operate as designed. System 1 cognition is actually where most gun violence occurs. They're not often calculated acts of harm. In fact, only 20% of the time is there a profit element or a calculated nature to it. The other 80% are often contextual, going back to unforgiving places where there are less eyes on the street, less informal social control, and the reactions are built off building a persona to ensure that I will not be victimized. System 1 reacts, it does not calculate. It requires interventions that appeal to the self-interest of the individual in crisis. We can't appeal to morals, ethics, or empathy quite yet in this stage. Purely, we need to negotiate and mediate through the situation using a trusted, credible source until the self-interest actually shifts to not inflict harm. Once we can come down from the crisis that System 1 is driving, we can shift some gears. We can shift gears in a few ways. First off, you need a relationship, and we call that floating, where we listen, we build trust, we get McDonald's at 3 a.m., we integrate laughter and lighthearted connection. And then we can shift to some coping skills, some stop, think, do from CBT, and we call this snorkeling, which gives folks a chance to look under the water or under their street persona and see some of the deeper work that is well within their reach without jumping deeply into it. Skills are what bring about a phone call at 3 in the morning before the violence happens, whether that's from the individual that could perpetrate it themselves or from someone in their network. They're valuable, but you need to present these skills in non-clinical ways. The presentation of skills could be asking a question in the front seat of a car, like, if you had another way to react, would you? Would you give it a try? Maybe just to try something new. Finally, we can shift into diving, getting under that street persona, putting on our oxygen tanks and going deep and working on harder things, talking about the past if it impacts the present, and using modalities like narrative therapy and acceptance and commitment therapy to climb into some pretty cobwebbed, dark places. We shine light and compassion inside, and we externalize problems from people. An example of this could be an individual who goes by BK on the street, but his government name is Charles. We can externalize BK from Charles, as BK is the one typically perpetrating the violence that Charles doesn't feel so good about after. We can ask Charles what he believes his morals are, where he first heard rhetoric about violence being a solution. And then we can ask BK to answer those two questions as well. Two identities, the same person. What happens here is when BK starts to escalate, Charles feels empowered to take on some System 2 thinking and some System 1 skills and calm BK down. And what we see is when peers refer their peers to our program, we can get to snorkeling and diving at a much quicker pace. There's been a grandfathered experience of trust, and this also applies for crisis situations. If a peer encourages another peer to connect with us, crisis support can happen more efficiently and effectively.
Doing all the emotional support-driven work matters and is at the core of our program. But as organizations, the challenge becomes, how do we track it? Is it working? As I said earlier, this doesn't happen in short funding cycles. You can get some early wins for sure. Recidivism rates in the short term, re-entry into school, but your data needs to go beyond the traditional checkboxes, and the data matters. To move beyond anecdotal success and prove the efficacy of this model, we meticulously track data across key service areas. Our tracking is designed to capture the intensity of engagement and the magnitude of behavior change. Our data collection shows that we are intensely present, successfully showing up in moments that matter, and generating the empirical data needed to both assess risk and continually improve our model.
At a glance over the last couple of years, the work has held impact, and we're excited about the trajectory that we're on. And so far in 2025, we're on our way to even more impact and more learning.
We know that the data and evidence work in Canada around these models is lacking. Much of this, however, has been tracked in the US for years through various programs, models, and through the US Department of Justice. We knew we had to start not only by creating a Canadian context for this intervention work, but by partnering with academics and like-minded agencies to start a robust evidence-based context for this work in Canada. So this slide represents just a few of our partners.
How do we track violence intervention? We track a several list of things. How many individuals were involved, how many groups were involved, the location of the violence, again, going back to that place-based outreach and crime hotspots. How were we notified of the violence? Did we find out through a peer? Did the person at the center of the violence themselves reach out before, during, or after? And this notification method matters when thinking about trust and which intervention tool will be used. What type of conflict was it? Was it multi-network related? Was it interpersonal dynamics within a network? Or was there no network relation at all and it was maybe a domestic or a familial situation? And finally, did violence occur after the intervention, typically 72 hours after? We can stop the violence in the moment, and maybe we just postponed it. Or were we able to resolve the challenge restoratively to result in no violence at all? We also gather insights from social media and online conflicts. This is really relevant to gather the pulse of what could fuel a conflict or retaliatory violence in person. This is an example of intervention working. While we're looking at a police article of a shooting that already happened, we were able to support this individual to do a voluntary surrender to police. This was not our first voluntary surrender for an active shooter investigation, but we've supported this individual to walk himself in after he had built up some skills and his system 2 cognition made a calculated, mindful choice to turn himself in. We still support him while he's in custody, as we do with all of our folks. And based on therapeutic engagement, he got himself to a place where he made an informed decision with his well-being at the forefront. We knew several push and pull factors for this individual because we understood the larger group dynamics at play based on his social network.
This slide provides a preliminary look at the immediate success of violent intervention efforts. The question we're asking here is, did violence occur within 72 hours after the intervention? As you can see, in 90.9% of the incidents where our credible messengers intervened, where a conflict was mediated or a client was immediately linked to crisis support, no subsequent violence occurred within the critical 72-hour window. Often we hear about retaliatory violence, specifically when we speak about group or gang violence. So it's important to track the period after a violent incident. Sometimes we can't track the initial violence or frankly even stop it. But what if we could mitigate the after effects? What if the chain stopped there? What if those individuals on the other side of the yellow tape were not picking up their phones or responding on social media and planning because they had help to support and spell out next steps for themselves? Steps they had talked about with us in the past, steps that would inherently reduce the risk of them being the next target.
Results take time, but the norms amongst a group can change, and the positive change becomes contagious. Here you can see someone reaching out before they're upset, before they do something in an upset moment, allowing their system 2 cognition to give them some other pathways. Another text message here you can see is from someone that's done a peer introduction, which made it much faster to build trust with this new client that he brought into our space. Some additional examples of what violence interruption at the community level looks like we said, voluntary surrenders, negotiating with those at the center of violence to choose nonviolent conflict responses, in-the-moment interventions, ceasefire agreements, and peers interrupting peer cycles of violence.
Here's a de-identified glance of some of our caseload. We've classified them amongst groups we know to exist in the GTHA, and we've pointed to rivalries and volatile situations and intentionally allocated resources to these groups and the dynamics to learn more and ultimately try to prevent the violence. This is where credible messengers matter, so ceasefires can exist. This allows us to see both group dynamics and the individual dynamics to try and predict and prevent violence and gain further insight into the shifts of embeddedness and individual entrenchment levels. This data is monitored daily from various channels, including social media and our CVIs, as well as client conversations, so it's up to date and rapidly changing. Currently, the landscape as justice services or a social media risk analysis will tell if that we are seeing more interpersonal conflict in groups rather than gang-on-gang violence. We're not saying that territory-type wars from the movies don't exist, but when multiple people in the same group are fighting to survive, often the violence starts from within the same group. Being up to date with not just where your caseload as individuals are, but the dynamics among their group as a whole is critical. In our example here, individual 1, highlighted, holds weight. He has the ability to make things happen, which means they are the person that we are allocating our efforts to. He is one of the 20%. The goal to stop the violence and shift both individual norms and group norms. Thinking about some of the words we hear often in this work, like loyalty and respect, which are deeply embedded in these systems. If the others in this group view this as part of the lifestyle, then individual 1 can shift the narrative. It's important to note here that although we are tracking these in our regions, these same individuals and these same groups are across the country in various forms. We know that individuals we work with are transient. They move all over the country. We know a lot of these connection points are rooted in the GTHA. Given this, trust is what links all of these individuals to our organization. This is just an example of one particular young man that we now support. You can see from this slide that these clients are often multi-jurisdictional and usually are paths crossed when they are introduced in various ways through peers here in Hamilton. Again, this is a reason to start having discussions about how we work together, not with just police, but as social service providers who have an opportunity at each of these intersecting locations.
And finally, how are we changing norms in real time? Most of this therapeutic norm change work happens in the front seat of a 2011 CRV. The passenger seat is where emotions are shared, where scuba diving and snorkeling can happen. Each of these stickers on this dashboard are from an individual that we work alongside. They hold a memory of a good cry, of a self-realization. And what this has done is encourage other individuals who enter the front seat for the very first time to ask who put all these stickers here. And when they find out it came from folks experiencing similar things to them, maybe even someone that they answer to, their walls fall much faster. Trust can begin safely, and another sticker is often added to the dashboard. Every one of these stickers has a story to tell and shows the norm change with those in our community, from shifting ideas from violence to peace. So in summary, gun and gang violence reduction is achieved best with a public health methodology, which is implemented through a community violence intervention model. Knowing who the leader of a group or who holds weight in a group matters to make both group and individual behavior change. Relationships matter deeply, with relentless engagement, place-based outreach, trust, and love at the core. These models are not new. They have been utilized successfully in the US and in the UK. And the why behind a violent act matters when choosing an intervention tool. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Liz and Jen. Thank you. I was worried that your camera wasn't working, but it was probably a lot easier to focus. So thank you for that presentation. I'm seeing lots of hearts. I don't have any questions in the Q&A, but I'm wondering if anybody would like to come off mute and ask Jen or Liz any questions about their presentation, which was very, very interesting and thorough. Really, really appreciated it. Any questions from folks as we wrap up today, other than a...
Hi, I have a question real quick. On Tassie, I'm working with the city of Toronto, building out some models here also. How many staff do you have on team? Because it's a 24-hour model. So I'm just curious in terms of your staff makeup. I guess how does the operational component of things look?
Yeah, so our staff model is typically 3 full-time staff members, and then we have our credible messengers that we employ for various areas. So depending, obviously, in the gang context, you know, a credible messenger that we may have on staff may not be able to respond in a certain area, just because of his historical ties. So we have to be able to pull those folks from other regions. And so often that means lots of part-time work.
Thank you. I'll probably reach out to you guys separately. Thank you.
Sounds good.
Very interesting. Any other questions for our presenters today? Trying to see if I have, feel free to put your hand up or your thumb. Oh, I just saw somebody come off mute. No,
Hi. Sorry, I didn't get my hand up.
that's okay, Shelley. Go ahead.
Sorry. I'm curious about your, like, the full-time staff that you employ and what kind of backgrounds they have, what's been important for your staff in terms of education, experience, that kind of thing.
I think it's a blend of things. Our full-time staff, again, are very small. We have, I think some of us have some more therapeutic experience. That therapeutic work can be really challenging. And there's an opportunity for that work to be done really succinctly in conjunction with peers, but having someone that does have some clinical experience is important, that's able to kind of work in the gray area. And then lived experience with the incarceration system, with substance use and addictions, anything street level. This program is built for those that it services by those that it services.
Yeah, so a big part of this was bringing in those peers and learning what it is they needed to do. Leaning on the people, the education piece came after the people. I think one thing here is that this is relationship-based work. So thinking about who was closest to those circles, who had some lived experience in those circles, and then let's go get them trained up to make sure that they can handle those risk assessments and do some of that work. Because sometimes that outweighs the decision about whether or not they have a BSW. And so there is a mix of folks on staff. I myself am not an academic. I come from this of 30 years of street outreach, working out here, boots on the ground with folks, unhoused community, but my background is in addictions. And I think we've both taken some training in the US around gang intervention because that training isn't offered yet in Canada. So we are currently doing our own course in peer training and designing that alongside some academic institutions.
Okay, perfect. That's helpful. Thank you.
Okay.
I saw one more question in our chat about volunteer opportunities. For this program, we actually don't accept volunteers. We are, a small team for a reason at this moment in time. It's pretty nuanced work, so we are looking to put volunteering on hold at this point, but keep checking our website for additional opportunities for other programs that exist in our space.
Hey, so we have about 5 minutes left in the presentation, which is excellent. If anybody has any questions in the meantime, feel free to put them in the chat or come off mute. Happy to have Jen and Liz answer those questions. In the meantime, we do have an evaluation that you'll find near your actual right beside the join button in your event space. So thank you once again to our speakers, Jen and Liz from the Hamilton Hub. Really appreciated this presentation. I just want to say the 20% and the social networking analysis, very, very interesting, in being able to see how everybody works together so that you can have those connections and contact and information to support that detection and interruption of violence, cycle of violence that you spoke about. Really loved that, and the trauma-informed approach as well. So thank you again. And we're going to be taking an hour's break now for lunch from 12 to 1. We do have a lunchtime session that does start at 12:15 called What Do We Keep Missing About Addiction? A very interesting lunchtime session. Feel free to join that one. Following lunch at 1 p.m., please join us back for a keynote panel called Collaborating for Change, Disrupting Homelessness and Justice Involvement. So a good connection again to some of the things that we talked about in this session. So to join that keynote session, click on the agenda link in the menu bar and then click the join button to join that. Our B series of concurrent sessions will follow after the afternoon break at 3 p.m. this afternoon. Click on the agenda in that platform to choose your session in the B series and click the join button for the session that you would like to join. So thank you all again from all over the province for joining this session. Thank you again, Jen and Liz. Looking forward to being a facilitator at other sessions today and tomorrow. Have a great lunch, everyone. Oh,
Thanks so much. Take
Thank
care.
you.
oh, volunteers. Yeah, we talked about that. Thank you, everything. Thank you, everyone.